He opened the security app expecting to find yet another nanny breaking protocol. 11 caregivers before her had quit, stolen, mistreated his daughters, left them worse than they found them. So when he saw those 3 wheelchairs sitting abandoned in the corner of the playroom, his pulse spiked with dread. Then he saw them. His 3 paralyzed daughters, the same girls doctors swore would never bear weight, standing on trembling legs, taking steps, walking toward Naomi's outstretched arms. Ethan's phone slipped from his grip, his knees buckled, and the man who had declared miracles dead watched one unfold on a screen in his own home. 3 years ago, Ethan Caldwell lost everything that defined him. His wife, Rachel, died in the car accident that should have killed all of them. One moment they were driving home from a family dinner. The next moment, glass was shattering, metal was twisting, and Rachel's hand slipped from his as the impact threw their car into a ravine. She died before the ambulance arrived. Ethan walked away with a fractured shoulder. But his triplet daughters, Emma, Lily, and Grace, barely 8 months old, absorbed the worst of it. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. Severe spinal neurological trauma. All 3 girls. The kind that doesn't heal, doesn't improve, doesn't give second chances. Mr. Caldwell, we need you to understand the reality here. Based on the imaging and nerve response tests, independent movement is unlikely. Walking is not something we can promise. Possibly never. Ethan heard every word. But he refused to accept them. Not then. He was still trying to understand how he could bury his wife while keeping his daughters alive. Months crawled by. The girls didn't improve. They didn't reach milestones. They sat strapped into tiny wheelchairs, eyes bright but bodies still, dependent on everyone for everything. Ethan spent a fortune on specialists. He flew in neurologists from Switzerland, bought experimental therapy equipment that cost more than most people's yearly salaries, transformed an entire wing of his mansion into a medical facility. Nothing worked. The girls didn't stand. They barely moved beyond reflexes. And Ethan, alone in his sprawling Connecticut estate with only the hum of medical machines for company, started to surrender to what the doctors said. His daughters would never dance, never run through the garden, never climb into his lap on their own. He buried that dream right next to Rachel. Then came the nightmare of caregivers. 11 in 18 months. The first lasted 3 weeks before admitting she couldn't handle watching children who wouldn't improve. The second spent more time texting than engaging with his daughters. Ethan fired her the same day. The third seemed perfect. Gentle. Experienced. Until he discovered she'd been selling details about his family to gossip sites for cash. After that, something inside Ethan shattered completely. One caregiver stole jewelry from Rachel's belongings. Another was caught on medication she claimed was for migraines, but was actually lifted from his medicine cabinet. Each woman arrived with credentials and references and compassionate smiles. Each one left with another piece of his ability to trust. Control became his religion. Surveillance became his prayer. He installed discreet cameras in every corner of the house, every hallway, every room his daughters occupied. He watched the footage late into the night, rewinding, zooming, searching for the next betrayal he knew was inevitable. So when Naomi Brooks walked through his front door, 27 years old, soft-spoken, unnervingly calm, Ethan didn't see a caregiver. He saw failure number 12 waiting to unfold. No improvising, he told her, his voice cold as marble. No experimental methods, no bonding beyond what's necessary. Follow the therapy protocols exactly as written. The doctors have made their prognosis clear. These girls will not walk. Don't give them false hope. Naomi met his eyes and nodded. I understand, Mr. Caldwell. But she didn't understand the way he meant it. Or perhaps she understood something deeper. Because Naomi didn't follow his rules. She sang worship songs over those girls when she thought no one was listening. She moved their limbs in ways the physical therapist's manual never suggested. She whispered blessings like she believed God himself was in that room. like she believed paralysis was only a chapter, not the ending, and Ethan watched every moment through his cameras. At first, he watched to document her inevitable failure. Then he watched because something impossible was happening in those white-walled rooms. Something small at first, easy to dismiss. Emma's fingers curled around Naomi's thumb during playtime. Lily held her head upright longer than her neck muscles should allow. Grace smiled, really smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes, during one of Naomi's silly songs. Ethan told himself it was coincidence. He told himself hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. He told himself the doctors knew best. But late at night, alone in his office, with the blue glow of security monitors painting shadows across his face, Ethan watched a woman fight for his daughters with nothing but joy and belief. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he thought died with Rachel, something started to stir. He didn't trust it. He couldn't. Because hope, when you've buried it that deep, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like betrayal. But before we go any further, hit that subscribe button, smash that like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever felt like believing again was too dangerous, like faith might shatter you if you let it back in, this story will wreck you in the best way. Because sometimes God doesn't ask permission to perform miracles. He just shows up in a blue uniform and a caregiver's smile and dares you to believe the impossible is only impossible until it isn't. Now let me take you back to the moment everything Ethan thought he knew about limits, medicine, and the voice of God began to crumble. It started on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Naomi arrived. Ethan was in his office, reviewing quarterly reports when he decided to check the cameras. Routine surveillance. Nothing more. Naomi had Emma and Lily positioned on her back, their small arms draped over her shoulders, their legs dangling as she moved around the playroom on her hands and knees like some kind of human carousel. Grace sat in front of them, gripping a soft rope Naomi had tied to a low beam, and Naomi was encouraging her, to pull. Ethan's hand slammed the desk. What the hell is she doing? This wasn't protocol. This wasn't in any medical manual. The physical therapist had been explicit. Minimal strain, controlled movements, no risk of falls or overstimulation. And here was Naomi, treating his paralyzed daughters like they were at a playground. He reached for his phone to call her, to fire her on the spot. But something made him pause. He leaned closer to the screen, his anger hovering, waiting for justification. Naomi was singing something, her voice too low for the camera's microphone to catch clearly. But he could see her lips moving, see the rhythm in her body. And then he saw his daughters' faces. They were smiling, not the vacant, reflexive kind, real smiles. Emma's head rested against Naomi's shoulder, her eyes bright, alert. Lily had her fingers tangled in Naomi's hair, holding on, participating. And Grace was pulling that rope. Not much, not far, but her hands were gripping, her arms were flexing. Ethan sat back in his chair, his anger colliding with something he couldn't name. He didn't fire her. He watched. Over the next few days, Ethan realized something that unsettled him more than the rule-breaking itself. Naomi wasn't being reckless. She was being intentional. Every movement had purpose. When she carried the girls, she positioned their bodies to engage core muscles. When she sang, she matched the rhythm to the stretches, turning therapy into something that looked like joy. She didn't treat them like fragile, broken things. She treated them like children, like they were capable of more than their diagnosis suggested. And she talked to them constantly. Not the patronizing baby talk some of the previous caregivers used, but real conversation. Come on, Emma. I know you've got more strength in that grip. Lily, let's see if we can hold your head up for 10 whole seconds today. Grace, baby girl, your legs are waking up. I can feel it. But it was what Ethan saw late one night that truly shattered his composure. He'd been reviewing footage from earlier that evening, fast-forwarding through the bedtime routine, when he caught Naomi kneeling beside the girls' beds after she thought everyone was asleep. He slowed the playback, turned up the volume, Her voice came through the speakers, barely a whisper. Lord, wake up what the world said was asleep. Restore what medicine said was stolen. Let these babies feel your hand on their spines, your breath in their muscles, your power in their bones. She prayed over each girl by name. She placed her hands gently on their foreheads, their legs, their small, still feet. Her face was wet with tears. Father, I'm asking for the impossible because you are the God of the impossible. Let Ethan see you. Let him believe again. Ethan's throat tightened. The room suddenly felt warmer, like something unseen had shifted the air. He'd stopped praying 3 years ago, stopped believing God heard him, stopped believing God cared. But watching this woman weep over his daughters, interceding for them like they were her own, something inside his chest cracked open. Then the small miracles started appearing. Miracles he couldn't explain away with coincidence or wishful thinking. Emma's fingers began moving independently during hand exercises, curling and releasing with deliberate control. Lily activated her core muscles during tummy time, holding herself up for 12 full seconds, then 15, then 20. Grace tilted her head toward sounds, tracked Naomi's movements across the room with focused eyes. And one afternoon, during one of Naomi's silly songs, Grace laughed. Not a reflexive sound. A real, delighted, belly-deep giggle that echoed through the speakers and hit Ethan like a physical blow. He stopped watching the cameras to catch Naomi failing. He started watching to see what would happen next. His reports sat untouched. His meetings ran late because he forgot to leave his office. He became obsessed, not with control, but with hope. And it terrified him, because if Naomi was right, if his daughters could improve, could heal, could become more than their diagnosis, then what did that say about him? The father who'd accepted their limitations. The man who'd stopped fighting for them. The grieving husband who'd buried hope alongside his wife and never dug it back up. Why does she believe in them more than I do? The question haunted him during the day and stalked him through sleepless nights. He'd given them the best doctors, the most expensive equipment, every medical advantage money could buy. But Naomi gave them something he'd withheld: faith, belief, the audacity to imagine they could be more. One evening, Ethan sat in his office later than usual, exhausted, running on caffeine and guilt. He pulled up the day's footage, intending to just skim through, but something made him rewind to the afternoon session. He watched Naomi working with Grace, stretching her legs, singing softly, encouraging her with that unshakable gentleness. Then it happened. Grace's left leg moved. Not a spasm, not a reflex, a deliberate lift. Just an inch off the mat. Maybe less, but it was intentional, controlled, impossible. Ethan froze the frame, rewound it, watched it again. His hands were shaking. The doctor said she couldn't even initiate movement in her lower limbs. The neurologists had shown him the scans, explained the damage, used words like permanent and irreversible. But the camera didn't lie. And what the camera caught was a little girl doctors declared would never move her legs, lifting one toward the ceiling like she was reaching for something only she could see. Ethan's breath came short and sharp. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he whispered into the silence of his office, God, if you're doing this, if you're really in that room with them, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry I stopped believing. When he opened his eyes, the frozen image of Grace's lifted leg was still on the screen. Proof, evidence, a crack in the wall of impossible. And Ethan realized he wasn't just watching his daughters heal. He was watching his own heart remember how to beat. Ethan found Naomi in the playroom the next morning. Grace balanced on her hip while she guided Emma's hands to grip a soft foam block. He stood in the doorway, his prepared speech dissolving on his tongue as he watched Grace's head rest comfortably against Naomi's shoulder. Stable, controlled, you're breaking every medical rule. The words came out harder than he intended. Naomi turned slowly, her expression calm, unbothered by his tone. She adjusted Grace gently before meeting his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell, with respect, your daughters don't need more rules. They've been living inside rules their entire lives. Rules about what they can't do, what they'll never do, what's impossible for them. What they need is someone who believes they can." Ethan's jaw tightened. The doctors were clear about their prognosis. Doctors see scans and data. Naomi's voice was steady, not defensive, just honest. "I see 3 little girls who smile when they're challenged, who engage when they're treated like they matter, who respond to faith like it's medicine." She paused, her eyes holding his. "Faith makes the impossible kneel. Mr. Caldwell, maybe it's time we stop bowing to limitations and start speaking to potential." He wanted to argue, wanted to pull control back into his hands where it was safe. But the words caught in his throat because he'd seen what she'd seen. He'd watched it on camera. The progress was undeniable. The physical therapist arrived that afternoon for the weekly evaluation. Dr. Marcus Chen had been working with the girls since the accident. A patient man with realistic expectations and gentle bedside manner. Ethan watched from the hallway as Marcus examined each girl, his expression shifting from clinical observation to something close to confusion. Marcus found Ethan in the kitchen afterward, his tablet tucked under his arm. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to ask, have you changed their therapy routine?" Ethan hesitated. "The caregiver has been using some unconventional methods." Marcus nodded slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever she's doing, it's working. I'm documenting muscle activation I didn't expect to see for another year, if at all. Emma's grip strength has doubled. Lily's core engagement is remarkable. And Grace," he paused, "Grace initiated lower limb movement today. Voluntarily. That shouldn't be possible, given her injury profile." The validation hit Ethan like a wave. "So, you're saying I shouldn't stop her?" Marcus met his eyes. "I'm saying if I were you, I'd be asking her to teach me what she knows." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He found himself in his office at 2 a.m., pulling up the live camera feeds out of habit. The girls' bedroom was dark, except for the soft glow of their nightlight. He was about to close the app when he caught movement. Naomi, kneeling between their beds. He turned up the volume, his chest tightening as her voice filled the speakers. "Rise again," she sang softly, her hands resting on Emma's blanket. "You are daughters of the Most High, and He does not make mistakes." She moved to Lily's bed, tears tracking down her face. "Every muscle, every nerve, every cell in your body. I speak life over you. I speak restoration. I speak the power of Jesus into these bones." Ethan's vision blurred. He watched her pray for 20 minutes. Watched her weep over his daughters like they were her own. Watched her pour out faith he didn't know still existed in the world. When she finally stood and wiped her eyes, Ethan closed the app and sat in the darkness of his office. Something breaking open inside him that had been sealed for 3 years. He opened his laptop, typed neuroplasticity in children into the search bar. Then faith-based healing testimonies. Then miracle recoveries from paralysis. He read until his eyes burned, until the sun started creeping through his blinds, until the scientific and the spiritual blurred together into something that looked like possibility. And then, alone in his office with the weight of 3 years pressing against his chest, Ethan Caldwell folded his hands and whispered into the silence. "God, if you're still there, if you can still hear me after all this time, please help my girls. I don't know how to believe like she does. I don't know how to have that kind of faith. But if you're real, if you're moving in that room, don't stop. Please don't stop." The prayer felt rusty, awkward, like speaking a language he'd forgotten. But it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Over the following weeks, the progress accelerated. Emma gripped the edge of her activity table and held herself partially upright, her arms trembling with effort but holding. Lily balanced in a supported sitting position for 3 full minutes, her core engaged, her spine straight. Grace pulled herself forward during tummy time. 1 inch, then 2. Her determination, fierce and beautiful. And Naomi celebrated every single moment like they'd just won the lottery. Every millimeter of movement, every second of endurance, every small victory got cheers and songs and prayers of thanksgiving. Ethan started spending less time in his office and more time watching from doorways, being present, letting himself hope. Then came the evening that stopped his heart. He checked the playroom camera while finishing dinner, a routine glance to see if Naomi needed anything. But what he saw made his fork clatter against his plate. The 3 small wheelchairs that had been a permanent fixture in that room for 3 years sat in a neat row against the wall, empty. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He stood so fast his chair tipped backward. His feet were moving before his mind caught up, racing through the hallway toward the playroom, toward the impossible, toward the miracle he was afraid to name. Ethan's hands trembled as he grabbed his phone, pulling up the camera app while his legs carried him toward the playroom. He had to see it again, had to confirm what his eyes told him before he burst through that door and shattered whatever fragile moment was happening. He stopped in the hallway, his back against the wall, and zoomed in on the live feed. His breath caught and held. The 3 wheelchairs sat empty against the far wall, their specialized cushions undisturbed, their safety straps hanging loose. And there, in the center of the playroom, his 3 daughters stood on wobbly legs behind Naomi, their small hands gripping her fingers, their bodies upright, vertical, impossibly vertical. Naomi was kneeling in front of them, her voice carrying through the speaker. "Come on, babies. Come to me. You can do it. I'm right here." Emma moved first, one foot sliding forward, then the other, her legs shaking with effort but holding her weight. Then Lily, her steps smaller, more cautious, but deliberate, intentional. And Grace, the one doctor said had the most severe damage, lifted her foot and placed it down 6 inches forward, then did it again. They were walking. 3 little girls doctors claimed would never stand, never bear weight, never take independent steps, were walking across a playroom floor toward a woman who believed they could. Ethan's knees gave out. He slid down the wall, his phone slipping from his hand, his whole body shaking with sobs he couldn't control. "Thank you, God." The words ripped out of him, raw and desperate. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." His hands covered his face, years of grief and guilt and surrender pouring out of him in gasps that burned his throat. "I'm sorry I stopped believing. I'm sorry I gave up on them. Thank you for not giving up on us." He didn't know how long he sat there, broken open on the hallway floor, but when he finally pulled himself together enough to stand, his legs were unsteady beneath him. He picked up his phone, shoved it in his pocket, and ran. Sprinted through the mansion he'd walked through like a ghost for 3 years, his heart pounding against his ribs, his vision blurred with tears he didn't bother wiping away. He hit the playroom door hard enough to make it bang against the wall. Naomi looked up, startled, but his eyes went straight to his daughters. Standing, teetering slightly, their legs trembling, their small bodies leaning into Naomi's support, but standing on their own power, their own strength, their own impossible miracle. "Daddy." Emma's voice was small, surprised, delighted. Ethan dropped to his knees 6 feet away from them, his arms opening, his voice breaking. "Come here, baby girls. Come to Daddy." Naomi met his eyes, and something passed between them, understanding and permission and shared awe. She released their hands gently, staying close enough to catch them, but giving them space to choose. The girls swayed, finding their balance, their faces scrunched with concentration. Then they moved toward him. 1 step, 2 steps, their legs wobbly but willing, their determination fierce and beautiful. Ethan's whole body shook as he watched them close the distance, watched the impossible become real, right in front of him, not through a camera, not on a screen, but here, now, in the flesh. They collapsed into his arms halfway across the room, their momentum carrying them forward into his chest. And Ethan caught them, pulled them close, felt their weight against him in a way he'd never felt before. They were standing, leaning into him, yes, but bearing their own weight, their legs beneath them, their bodies upright and strong and alive. He buried his face in their hair and wept, great, heaving sobs that shook all four of them, releasing 3 years of darkness and fear and faithlessness. His daughters wrapped their small arms around his neck, holding him back. Present, aware, participating in the moment that rewrote their entire future. Naomi's voice was soft behind him. "Mr. Caldwell, I need you to know something." He looked up at her through tears, and her eyes were wet too, shining with something holy. "I felt called to this house. Before I ever walked through your door, God told me your girls would rise again. He showed me they would walk. But he needed one person in this house to believe it was possible. He needed someone to speak life when death had been declared. He needed faith to make room for the miracle." Ethan's throat was too tight to speak, so he just nodded, holding his daughters closer. Over the next hour, he watched them take more steps, watched them hold onto furniture, balance against the couch, move from one end of the room to the other with Naomi's encouragement and his tearful cheers. The mansion that had felt like a tomb for 3 years suddenly blazed with light. Literal afternoon sun poured through windows he'd kept curtained, and something else, something he couldn't name but could feel. Warmth and presence and peace that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with spirit. The girls laughed as they practiced walking. Real, belly-deep giggles that echoed off the walls and chased shadows out of corners. Naomi sang worship songs while she guided them, and for the first time in his life, Ethan joined in, his voice rough and off-key but sincere. That evening, as the sun set and painted the playroom gold, Ethan sat on the floor with his daughters surrounding him. They were tired, their muscles exhausted from the work they'd done, but they were standing, holding onto his shoulders, using him for balance. Emma kissed his cheek, Lily patted his face with her small hand, Grace rested her forehead against his, and Ethan realized he wasn't just watching his daughters heal. He was healing too. His faith, his hope, his ability to believe in goodness, all of it knitting back together in the presence of 3 small miracles and one woman who refused to accept impossible as final. When science ended, God began. And he used a maid named Naomi to reopen a billionaire's heart, to restore 3 broken bodies, and to prove that faith doesn't just move mountains. Sometimes it moves legs doctors swore would never walk, and hearts fathers thought would never beat again.